Welcome to the Essential Self-Care Podcast, where we talk about all things self-care for those of us who are, let's face it, too busy for self-care. It's time to bring that same compassion that you offer to everyone else in your life to yourself as well. In this podcast, you'll hear real-life stories of how self-care transformed people's lives as they were going through life's storms. You'll learn practical, actionable tools to begin the self-care journey yourself as well. Because like I always say, small changes make a large impact. I'm your host, Dr. Sheetal Ajmani. I'm a physician, best-selling author, and the founder of Radiant Living Institute, where I guide strong, successful women to get unstuck and learn to live radiantly again through major life transitions. Through my signature program, Reclaim Your Radiance, you'll reclaim your worth, renew your energy, and restore your happiness in your life, career, and relationships. To get started, download your free guidebook, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life at radiantlivinginstitute.com. Quick disclaimer before we get started, the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Always seek the advice of your own medical practitioner and or mental health provider about your specific situation. Now, let's get started. Today, I have the pleasure to introduce Wendy Goldberg as a guest to the Essential Self-Care Podcast. Wendy Goldberg is the founder and president of the Benjamin Goldberg Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that enriches lives through healing arts by creating peaceful, playful, and inspirational environments, developing and supporting arts and health programming, and serving as a community resource. The spirit of Benjamin Goldberg, Wendy's son, is the guiding force in bringing the foundation's work to life and to transforming health and healthcare experiences through the arts. Wendy is also the host of Sundays with Wendy, a podcast featuring conversations with guests about their insights on the healing journey. Personally, Wendy is a dear friend who I met a few years ago, and we immediately connected with our shared interest in raising awareness of integrative modalities for healing. Welcome to the Essential Self-Care Podcast, Wendy.
Thank you for having me today.
I'm so excited to have you here. And as I mentioned, we met a few years ago, and it was at that time that I learned about the Benjamin Goldberg Foundation and Wendy's story with her son, Ben, who was diagnosed with cancer at a very young age. And so I wanted to explore with you today how you practice self-care, navigating the diagnosis, the treatments, and ultimately his transition, his death.
Yeah, I love telling and sharing some of this information and some of my story because it helped us so much when we were going through those difficult times. And I feel as if really leaning on routine in the things that I had brought into my life. So self-care was something that I'd always been interested in and, did in my daily life. But when you were faced with something so tragic, a small child being diagnosed with cancer, your world immediately changes. And sometimes it's very difficult to really be able to understand what's going on and understand that not only you are having these feelings, but the entire family is having these feelings, and to really lean on the things that kept me strong to even get to this point. So things like yoga. And I can tell you a story. I have always been an avid exerciser, and that was something that, is very important to me. But it wasn't until we were in the hospital with him in New York, and he was in the hospital, I want to say it was a couple of weeks, and he was in isolation. And his father and I split the time, and I would work during the day at the apartment, and I would go back in the late afternoon and spend the evening with him. And it was tough on my body to be crunched in those chairs and to be working off a bed and all the things that we had to do. And I thought to myself, I think I'm going to go try yoga. And so I went down to a local store, bought a mat, Googled hot yoga studio near me, and I went. But on the walk to the yoga studio, I had this wrenching guilt about going, is this pleasurable for me? Why would I leave my child in a hospital? Like, But I decided to keep walking.
Yeah.
And when I got finished with the class, I felt amazing. And I know I could not go 3 times a week,
Mhm.
maybe like if we were home. However, going once a week or even to have that opportunity to go
Mhm.
made me a better mom. So that hour that I took out of the week really enabled me, gave me the strength I needed to be present with him. And, I'd like to describe that as like, when you're in an airplane and the flight attendant is doing the speech and it always seemed weird to me until I had a child, but, they say, if the oxygen mask were to fall, take it on yourself first and then your child. And it's
Mhm.
that same idea that I had to be whole or full or have that in me to actually be able to give and support him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much that I love about what you shared. First of all, you shared that you had some routines and self-care practices even before Ben's diagnosis. But it sounds like through going up to New York for his treatments, staying in an apartment or a hotel and being in and out of the hospital and still working as well through all of this, right? You noticed that it took a toll on your body, and maybe you weren't able to initially practice all of the same self-care in terms of movement practices and exercise that you usually did. And so having that awareness of noticing how this was taking a toll on your body as well, and then saying, hey, yoga is something that I used to do. Movement has always been a big part of my life. Let me start to find a way to start to incorporate that. Again, maybe not at the same frequency as before, but starting to incorporate it. And then, that feeling of guilt, I think that's a strong feeling that many parents experience, right? Even without their child having a major life-altering diagnosis. And so in this situation, you did experience that, but ultimately you also knew that doing this for yourself, that 1 hour, helped you show up in the best way that you could ultimately for Ben and your family.
Right. And let's not forget that sometimes we discount that the children is observing your change in behavior as well. So I remember early on, we were here locally at the Children's Hospital, and I might have been complaining about my back or something. And Ben said to me at 5, he was 5 at the time, very aware, and said, Mom, why aren't you going to ballet anymore? So he was able to pick up on a difference in routine. And early on, it made me believe we cannot change anything different. If anything, yes, we're not going to be able to do everything the same, but to maintain a normalcy in routine was so important during that time.
Yeah. And you were sharing earlier in one of our conversations that when he was initially diagnosed, a social worker gave you a piece of advice that you found very valuable as well.
Oh, absolutely. And so I think it's so important when we're in these times to really listen and pay attention to what's around us and the information that's coming to us. And, having a social worker in our hospital room was something that was very foreign to me. And we were leaving after, I believe it was a 13-day stint. And this was around the diagnosis. This was our first trip home, so everything was going to be different from here on out. And she was sitting there so kindly. And I looked at her and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I ran a CPA firm, and his father and I had just gotten divorced, not even divorced a year. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she didn't even bat an eye. She said, you know what? You're not going to do anything different, because if that little boy starts seeing you home all the time, he's going to think something's really wrong. And maybe that wasn't great advice for every family, but it was good advice for ours. And it kind of enabled me to really create these routines, or make sure that I was keeping some sort of routine to keep our life as normal as possible. Because I like to say with Ben, we treated him like a normal kid. However, we had to care for him like a sick child. I think that gave us all this room and breath to do what we needed to do.
And I wonder, I think in a situation where you may feel like you have no control of the situation, perhaps
keeping up with some of those routines may have also been a bit empowering and help give a sense of agency or control over at least parts of the day or parts of the situation.
He would get a certain type of treatment where we would be in the hospital all day. So maybe we from 8 to 5, let's say.
Mhm.
So I, for 20 years, have drank the same kind of tea. It's a yerba mate green tea. And I, always part of my routine. So I brought my tea with me. And as simple as that sounds, so there was a period of time when Ben would fall asleep after the treatment, and I would walk around the hospital and find the hot water tank or ask someone for hot water or go down to the cafeteria. But there was something about having that tea, and I always did it in the afternoon. So it kind of really melded into the day and gave me a sense of, okay, it's the afternoon.
Yeah.
It's still the same day. We may be in a hospital. I may not be in my office, but I have my tea.
Yeah.
And, I always thought of that tea as like it's described as a whole body tonic. And so as I'm drinking it, I'm always feeling like that is, sustaining me. And something as simple as that, I may not be able to cook my own food or buy organic groceries like I had, but, when you can pull some of that in, it's so important.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that it's, something as simple, I'm going to use the word simple, as having a cup of tea and maintaining that in your routine. But that made such a huge difference. One thing that I always say is that small changes make a large impact. Sometimes it's just those, often we think that we have to do something really, really huge to feel better, to practice self-care. But often it's actually those small, simple routines done consistently that make the biggest difference, right? Like yoga was really important to you at that time. At the same time, it's not something you could do every day, right? Taking that hour, but this tea was something small that so having that once a week was super, super helpful. And having this tea kind of a sort of on a quote unquote smaller scale of the time that it takes, the energy that it takes to do that practice made such a large impact, right? So, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think some combination of all of this, but it just goes to show that self-care can look a lot of different ways.
And I think, when you I think of self-care, it's just being kind to yourself. I mean, we're all faced with things and challenges in our lives at different times, but we don't have to beat ourselves up about it either. I mean, to just be kind and do the things that you enjoy when you can. It is so simple.
I think also your example when you were sharing the story of walking to yoga, and as you were walking every step, you did feel that weight of guilt, but you kept taking that step. And I think that is often sort of a mindset shift to kind of deal with some of those heavy emotions of doing things that maybe a little bit differently, right? And I think that is an act of kindness of being able to practice releasing some of that guilt, because ultimately that this is helping you to show up as your best self.
100%.
So we talked a bit about practicing self-care through Ben's diagnosis, through his treatments, and ultimately Ben did transition. During that time also, I'm sure there was a time of grieving with the initial diagnosis as well as the treatments. And during this time of when he did transition, when he did pass away, a lot of grieving at that time as well. Can you tell me a little bit about your self-care journey and just kind of how you processed that time as well?
Yeah. And just so the listeners know, Ben was diagnosed and in treatment for 3.5 years. So that was a long period of time, to grapple with the possibility that he may transition. But, until that moment actually happens, you don't know how you are going to handle it. And I think I handled it in the same way I handled myself during his care. I ran a business and I took a couple weeks off to kind of gather myself. But for me, that was a good decision to get back into my routine and definitely honored the feelings that came along with it, as much like I did during his treatment. Just allowing the space and the emotions and feeling them in the moment and not running from them. But as time went on, movement was always so in yoga, all of those things so important to me. So I took up something new. I took up Pilates, which I've now grown to love. And, that was really important for me to kind of have a newness in that time. And just because I felt like I wasn't, and there's no judgment in the way people grieve, but I was going to be an active griever. I was not going to lay in a ball in the corner for months at a time. So how would I support myself in the way that I would continue on this journey without him, actually? So I started writing then. I had started writing Ben's story when he was still alive. And it took me years after, but at night I would come home and for me, it's almost like it was all still there. And I could pull myself into a room with a doctor and I could tell you whether he was clean shaven. I could tell you what color shirt he had on. So Ben just had such a powerful story. I wanted it written. And so that was very cathartic for me to share it in that way. So that helped. I also explored new ways of self-care that I hadn't before. I started working with a meditation coach that I worked with for over a year. And she really opened my eyes to, the grief can get stuck in your body, like the emotions can get stuck. And I think as much as I thought I was moving, there were aspects of it that just still layers that had to come off and to energetically work on it on that level and get your mind to understand that was really important as well. A year or so later, I took a Reiki class and saw that through and to the Reiki master program. With a Reiki, you have to heal yourself first and clear yourself first until you can go on in the levels and help other people. So, I think I had an open mind and I was curious about the ways that I could deal with the grief. And that's a lot going on right there, right?
Yeah.
So I continued the things that I always did because I always ate healthy and, exercise. So there wasn't a lot to fix or do as far as my health or that part of my lifestyle, but to open up a more energetic or spiritual way of doing it was huge for me.
What I'm hearing in everything that you shared is this curiosity. I love that aspect. Sometimes, going through these really challenging moments, finding a way towards curiosity can be really powerful. I think that just automatically and naturally does open your ideas to possibilities of what's around you, things that maybe even things that have always been around you, but you won't necessarily see unless you kind of have that curious mind. And then I also hear that a few things. So that the self-care is a journey, right? Because this grieving process and this journey, over a few years, you explored different healing modalities and paths, and that you really were open to and also exploring healing on truly the mind, body, spirit, and energetic levels, which I think is really beautiful. Movement, I always say, is really powerful. So emover is the root of emotion, and it means to move out. So emotions are not meant to stay stuck in your body. They're meant to move out. And one way that we do that is through movement. So I'm a big believer in movement as a really powerful self-care modality. Also, writing is just such a wonderful modality, as well as the meditation, the Reiki. So again, just kind of touching on these different layers and levels where you can practice self-care and find emotional, spiritual healing as well.
Because I think it's all three.
Yeah.
I really think to heal, you have to understand it in your body and then, clear it out of your more subtle bodies as well. So, and so I've learned a great deal.
Yeah. And because it's all connected, it really is. It all is connected, our physical body along with our subtle body. I think another really valuable thing that you mentioned is that you gave yourself that space to grieve as well, and that you allowed yourself to feel what you needed to feel, which I think can be really difficult. Many of us can put a lot of judgment and pressure on ourselves when we feel those heavy feelings that, hey, for some reason, maybe we shouldn't be feeling this, But I've found as well in my own life, when I've gone through really challenging situations, that when you're able to allow those feelings to come up. And for me, it's often been through meditative practice. When I'm able to sit in meditation with those feelings, they tend to pass. They can get really strong. But if you just allow yourself to kind of witness it, and I'm not saying this is necessarily easy, I think also, if it's something you don't have experience with, doing it with the assistance of a guide can be really helpful, as you did with a meditation coach. But if you're able to, they will pass. And so you're allowing it to move through you again. So as you said, so that it doesn't get stuck in your body and show up in other ways.
Right. Like this, the old saying, this too shall pass, so
Yeah.
the good things come and go, and so do the bad. And
Yeah.
so how do we, I think in our culture, it's kind of like everyone's be positive. And
Mhm.
yes, being positive is important, but it's deeper than that.
Absolutely.
It's kind of allowing, I think it's more in allowing what is not, instead of like, you could positively push something away, but to really harness what's going on. And then it's really in your reactions and the way you're responding to the situations that are so important.
Well, this has been wonderful, Wendy. I think we covered so many great topics and tools and modalities, and I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your personal story and Ben's story and your family's story with us. I was curious if, we covered a lot of different modalities.
Mhm.
I know that you had self-care practices before his diagnosis as well.
Mhm.
For someone who maybe doesn't already have those self-care practices or routines in practice, who's going through a really challenging situation, perhaps a parent facing a similar sort of situation as you had faced, a diagnosis for their child, what would kind of one piece of advice you would give for them to just to start out with practicing self-care in this situation
Right.
and processing this situation?
Right. Because we talked about several, and that's why I think you and I love integrated medicine and integrated therapies, because I feel like there's an array of things. There's not
Yeah.
just one way to do it. And I think in these situations, whatever you like. If you like to write, to start journaling, or if there's an aspect of your diet maybe you want to work on, just pick one thing. You could add fruit in the morning. So I think whatever little thing that is easy and fits into your life, and then maybe try something new.
Yeah.
It could be crocheting. It could be anything that soothes the mind is really important. Soothes the body and soothes the mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. What is resonating with you now in this moment? And just pick one thing. And if you could share a little bit about the Benjamin Goldberg Foundation, what inspired the foundation, what you're doing with the foundation, and then how we can find out more about the Benjamin Goldberg Foundation and get involved.
One of my favorite topics, sharing. Ben passed away in 2016, and it took me a minute. I did not know exactly what I was going to do to honor him, and I knew it would be something. So a couple of years passed, and I was volunteering at our local children's hospital, and I was on the floor, and you walk in the rooms in and out with the children, and I was taken back to our experiences at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. So during his treatments, we worked with a dance therapist, we worked with meditation, and it was so important to our family because some of those times were so stressful. And I think when the presence of those people were with us, what it did is it took the anxiety out of the room, and it allowed us to be 100% present with Ben. And I thought, why can't we do that here? And so I reconnected with the practitioners from Memorial, and one of the first things we did is brought the dance therapist who worked with Ben down, and I think you were involved in that.
I was there.
And she
Yeah,
did
absolutely.
a grand rounds at the hospital. And so we began talking about it. And that topic at the time of integrated medicine is a little scary for people. And so even our board would struggle. Well, how do we say what we're doing? And, so we didn't push it. I wasn't worried about maybe that not everyone understood it. We were just going to keep plugging along. And so, the projects came, and I always say the opportunities, and they were green light, go. And the hospital has since, we have a naming of the 5th floor oncology unit, the Benjamin Goldberg Playroom, which the money is really further, it is a naming, of course, on the glass. However, the money was further designated to go to integrated therapy. So they have since hired an art therapist and a music therapist that work with the children through there. So it is so, You never know when you start something. You have an
Yeah.
idea, and luckily I had such a wonderful board of family and friends at the time who were so supportive and believed in Ben's story. So to see it come to fruition and to see these things actually happening, and now we're creating programs, we've kind of broadened that angle, and arts and health is such an emerging field, and bringing these creative experiences and allowing children to be who they are, because Ben was good. He was who he was. He was big and known and strong. And I think that now, because of him, we are able to bring these to other people. So it's actually an honor to do the work I do. And
that's so amazing. And something that struck me also as you were sharing that experience of when you were at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and the music therapist and dance therapist and art therapist came in, it also made me think of some things that you shared with me earlier about your own journey with self-care, of being open to these different modalities and being open to, okay, there are these healing arts therapists coming into
because it can
my
be
son's hospital room, right? Never heard anything about this before, and just being open to those sort of different modalities.
Right. And I'll never forget. And I'm a curious person. So before that happened, we were in and out of the hospital, and it was a very open clinic. So, people, doctors, everyone was around. And I'll never forget the first time I noticed they had something extra going on. I saw a man in a black karate outfit with a red glove. And there was a kid screaming. He didn't want to be accessed. And that's a very traumatic experience for a child, no matter how many times they've been accessed. So the nurse couldn't handle him, and the parents couldn't handle him. Just almost completely out of control. And this guy, I'm just sitting here witnessing this. So this guy walks over to the child and just holds up his red glove and says, "Give me 10 kicks." And the kid started punching. And it was like, you could see it. You could see the kid's emotions just diffuse. So instead of the kid having to go home and maybe not have his treatment that day because he couldn't get accessed, the family was then able to move through the day. So that was the first time I saw it. And then I did a little research, and it's a whole program there of integrated medicine. And it is amazing. I feel very grateful for my time there.
And now continuing to raise that awareness, as well as bringing programming through the Benjamin Goldberg Foundation to bring more of that to help other children and families. And then as well as through your podcast, Sundays with Wendy, where you're bringing on healers from different modalities as well to share their journey. You also share more about your experience, Ben's journey, through the diagnosis. So I encourage our listeners to check that out as well. I'll have the links in the show notes, both to the Benjamin Goldberg Foundation as well as the Sundays with Wendy podcast. Thank you again for joining us today, Wendy.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a positive review, and share this episode with someone you know. And remember, your free guide, 6 simple yet powerful steps to create your radiant life, is waiting for you at radiantlivinginstitute.com. Download it today.